Let me give a bit of a background. I'm Burnett Thompson for those, and there are quite a few people who don't know me here. And I'm in the music world, and I met John years ago, really years ago, in the early 80s, I guess. Hard to believe. And I don't even remember why you were in the DC area. And then
I followed my wife there, and
all
and
right, okay.
spent 8 years. It's actually 86 to 94.
86. So, and we had a lot of fun with Peter Gajewski, who I invited tonight, and I may have to give him a call. The founder of then the Montgomery Chamber Orchestra, and then which became the National Philharmonic. So I remember specifically John played the piano part of the Bartok. Which dances was
Oh,
that?
no, it was the first piano concerto. No, I think, or maybe it was Shostakovich one.
It was the one that had the celeste and the piano. The Bartok something dances, and you were playing the piano, thank God, because it was much harder than the celeste part. You know, the celeste parts are all dinky dinky. So I was in a perfect role for that, and then you fled and you went to Clark University, and then you went on to Austin College. So I will
Yeah.
say this about John: he is an intimidating pianist, and has had a remarkable life in the more stratified regions of the music world. So we have what this is about, though, is John's interaction with the composer John Adams, who I'm sure everybody here knows. So, John, kick it off. Tell us, you have a long history with John Adams, and thanks. So let's start from the beginning. You were 11 years old.
Yeah. So my position vis-a-vis John Adams, it may be fairly unique in that most people who have sought out to work with John Adams over his long and illustrious career have sought him out, and because he's an extraordinary person, extraordinary composer. And in my case, I when I met him, I had no clue who he was because I was actually studying in San Francisco at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and I had been studying piano and composition for a few years there with the lovely teacher Eleanor Armour, and then she moved to Berkeley. And so, in the magical way of things when you're a kid, I think my mother spoke to somebody and somebody spoke back. And one week, suddenly I was no longer going to see Eleanor, but Ms. Armour, but going to see this new composer, John Adams. And and at this time, I mean, I read many years later that during this time, 76, he was not really yet fully involved in teaching composition there. He was actually more involved in conducting the orchestra. I think that changed as he got more involved in teaching people at the college level. But in my case, my guess is that he was sort of asked, "Will you take on this 11? I may have been 10. I'm not sure. A composer who seems to be very spirited, and see if you'll work with him." And from this distance, I praise the heavens. He actually said yes. And again, at that time, he was not really John Adams yet, as in terms of the world knowing who he was. And I think that's probably part of my luck is that at that time, he was sort of asked, "Will you take this student?" And he said yes. And so basically. What commenced was some just really extraordinary experience growing up. I'm pretty certain that he was only teaching other college students, at least once things got underway. For instance, I remember the now illustrious Aaron J. Kernis, who has done many wonderful things, quite well known. He and I would sort of pass each other by during lessons. But primarily, I mean, what I remember from my studies with John, I remember a lot of stretching, a lot of trying to get me into new areas. I'd started composing back when I was, well, I guess maybe what, 7 going on 8, just writing little piano pieces. And then, you know, started taking lessons, but was very, very classically driven, which is not at all unusual for kids who start composing at that point. And you know, I love Beethoven and Bizet, and you know, one of my favorite gifts is when I was 9 years old was the Beethoven string quartets and some LPs of the middle quartets, and all the rest of my toys got ignored for the next while. So when I came to John Adams, I had been taking, you know, attending some like summer workshops and doing some things, but for the most part, I remember him in later years saying that, you know, I was basically kind of a very spirited kind of Beethoven wannabe classical composer, which is not entirely what he was, as we know. But I remember a lot of very I remember going to a lot of loft concerts. I remember him one concert with him playing Terry Riley's In C, and he was actually playing at the top of the piano the steady, if you can hear that, the steady beat of eighth notes while everyone played. And he was not a pianist, and he said at the end, after doing that for, you know, a godly amount of time, his hands were just about ready to fall off. But yeah, taking me to all these concerts. I mean, compositionally, I think my earliest really strong memory of something of a lesson that had a strong impact on me is I think when I was 13, I had written a number of fairly classical pieces, or this little violin concerto that, again, in the magical way of things, ended up being played at this workshop by the San Francisco Symphony with the concertmaster. And again, I just sort of was told this was happening. I just showed up. I have a feeling John may have had a hand in that. But when I was 13, I brought him a series of, I'd written a theme and 3 variations in C major. And it was very classical, and let me know if you can't get the good sound here. But it was just a nice little pleasant tune. Etc. And then it had a little follow-up. Looks like another admit here. Looks like a little follow-up first variation, you know, etc. And then a third one with kind of rolling, etc. Yeah, but staying very, very much within that kind of world. And I brought them to him, and he said, "Okay, that's you know, that's nice. That's nice. We've been going and seeing all these things. You've been looking at a number of things. You know, why don't you go ahead and let yourself just kind of relax a little bit? I don't know, just let yourself do something a bit unexpected, maybe a little different from what you usually do." And that's kind of all it took. I went back, and the next week I came back with my next one, where I'd taken these 4 notes, C, B, A, G, and just turned into a descending idea. And it was... Where did it come from? I have no clue, you know. And by the last movement, it had some sort of little Caribbean etc. And it's kind of funny. I think you know, in later times, you know, I'd ask John, particularly there was a time many years later where I was experiencing a real kind of creative crunch, or sort of a block. I was having a hard time getting through. It was just too involved, you know, too dissatisfied with what was going on. And I remember him saying that, you know, when you were a kid, when we were studying in San Francisco, you know, music just flew from your fingers like breathing, and you know, and you need to get back to that. And that actually helped me very much work my way through that. And so, you know, where these came, who knows? But I know that I think John was just a very supportive person. He helped me get a lot of performances in those times. I remember when I was 14, I wrote a woodwind quartet, flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon, no horn. I didn't actually know about woodwind quintets, so I wanted to write a piece for woodwinds. But he conducted it himself and did a wonderful job. And that's just the type of things that he would do. He just sort of set up scenarios and kind of let me do my thing. And so that's, in terms of my studying with him, that's kind of fairly representative. One thing I remember actually is that when I was 14 or so, I think he wanted to start actually concentrating more on college teaching, just teaching college students. And so, in fact, things things had a sense of kind of maybe winding down. And then actually that same woodwind quartet won a BMI award, and then he just basically said, okay, here, let's keep on going. That sort of inspired him to stay with it, and I'm so glad he did. Basically, and that led to more things, and to other, going to the bigger summer camps, to Tanglewood, the Boston University, and so forth. Let me see, any other things I particularly remember during that time.
John, I'm going to move you forward to
please move me up
to Boston, where you wound up at Harvard. How did you wind up there, coming from the West Coast? Had you ever heard of Harvard before?
I'd probably heard about it. Well, I'd had a pretty good run of some musical honors during the senior year. And I had actually applied, and the three places I got into were Harvard, Yale, and Oberlin. And my grandfather actually went to Oberlin. But I went to an event, and I was absolutely geared towards Yale. And I went to John, and he said, okay, I'm going to Yale. And he literally said, no, you're not. You're going to Harvard, and you're going to study with my own mentor there, Leon Kirshner.
But in those days, Yale wasn't known for their undergrad program anyway, right?
No, I don't think I knew as much as I should have about any of the three of them. I knew they were all quite well regarded. But I mean, I'd say that, the real impact there is that studying with Kirshner, and I think also with Ivan Cherepnin there, who was a very, very dear friend of John's, and John was very, very admiring of his music. Those were just very, very, very pivotal things for me. Not only because Kirshner was a real standard bearer of traditions. He was, in some ways, he was very revolutionary, but he was a student of Schoenberg, who was, on one hand, very revolutionary with his 12-tone techniques and so forth. On the other hand, he saw himself as continuing history at a very high level with his heroes, who were, would be like Beethoven and Brahms and the like. And so I think I received a big, strong dose of that as well from Kirshner. And
my favorite quote from Schoenberg is in his book, his beginning counterpoint book. I'm sure you had that, where he has a footnote. It's all done in all the clefs, I think 7 clefs or whatever. And he says, if those who are not comfortable with the clefs and this kind of writing should consider themselves to be mere acrobats and not serious students of music. It was definitely from the 17th century, no question about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because
this was Schoenberg, that, by the way. Schoenberg was
Yeah. No, and it's very interesting, this combination of like tremendous craft and Kirshner would often talking about the brushstroke of the master. On the other hand, Kirshner was also very much he was a tremendous pianist and a very improvisatory pianist and a very wild pianist as well. And thinking back to John, things that many of the mentors I've had, I remember like one thing in particular they said. Like with Kirshner, it was, you're not Beethoven, and neither am I, and neither of us needs to be, you know. And later at Stanford, Jonathan Harvey said, composing is above all a matter of pure intentions, you know. And with John Adams, this was actually, I remember back studying with him, no longer at the conservatory. We had actually moved beyond the conservatory to just studying at his house. And I remember him saying that amidst all this craft, which he very much values and clearly in his composing, he says that so much of music is play. And that stuck with me. And that, again, I think I got a second dose of that from Kirshner as well, and definitely got a very strong dose of that from Ivan Cherepnin, who was amazing for just making me think about music in entirely different ways.
John, I'm going to move us forward because I promised
keep going.
It's going to be an hour. You played in the pit with on Nixon in China, and I meant to look up what year that started at it opened at the Kennedy.
87.
No. Yeah, I thought it was early.
Oh no, I have the pre-Kennedy Center stories there for you.
Yeah. So that's a big deal, you know, and you were playing you were playing a synthesizer that was invented during the time of Charlemagne, I think.
Just about. Though it actually also shows up in the movie The Running Man as with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 80s. It was set in 2019 Los Angeles, and there in the front room is a Yamaha HX1 synthesizer. It's a $35,000 multi keyboard thing. And anyhow, so here, how did I get involved in Nixon in China? Well, when I graduated from Harvard in '86 and moved to DC, it took a few years to get anything going, really. And I mean, I temp typed and did things of that nature, just and while I was just keeping my eyes open, trying to, you know, put up signs in laundromats, need a musician, you know, that type of thing. And then one day I got a panicked call from John, and he is in San Francisco. And he said, I'm doing a premiere run through of my opera, my new opera Nixon in China, and my orchestra just fell through. And this is in like 4 days. And so I know you're a very quick read. Would you mind learning learning this thing and flying out here? And I have 2 other pianists, and I have this synthesizer here. And would you be willing to try to make this thing go? And so, you know, at that point I had nothing going, and this sounded like a lot of fun. And so I said, sure. And so I went out there, and we did it. We spent many hours, and we got up there, and I really liked it a lot. I was quite impressed. The critics were a little bit more tentative. I think John Adams got one of his favorite reviews ever, which was I can't remember who the critic was, but he said, John Adams has done for the arpeggio what McDonald's did for the hamburger. And John, I'm sure that stung, but then he actually thought that was very, very funny, and he very, very much liked that quote. But he, I see a question. I don't know if I'm taking questions yet, but let me actually here, I'll take a quick question from Michael Wolf in the midst of this. Or maybe not.
Unmute. Michael, if you want to unmute.
Okay, let us continue on. Anyway, so, but then and that was supposed to be it. And to me, it was actually a wonderful performance. It was a wonderful experience, but that was supposed to be it. And the actual staged and all the bells and whistles version was in Houston, but I figured that was it. And then a few days before it opened up, I got another call. It's not working out. Can you come in and do this since you now know the part? And so I did, and it was wonderful. I remember I remember that's I mean, to me, even from where I was in the pit, I could tell this was something quite special. And actually, in Houston, things started really evening out a bit. Audiences were divided. But I remember, for instance, Andrew Porter at the New Yorker. He said this very well might be a masterpiece. And from there, actually, that was supposed to be actually, then they set me up to do it in Brooklyn. And then they said, no, it's a union thing. We have to go with Brooklyn people. And so I said, fine. And they said, oh, maybe you can. And they said, no, you can't. And then finally, they said, you can't. No, we're going with a New York pianist. And I said, fine. Day before it opened, got the call. Can you be out here for 5.5 weeks? And I said, let me ask my wife. Anyhow, so I headed over, but that was the recording. And so I got to play with the Orchestra of St. Luke's, which is a tremendous orchestra. And it just led to other things. And then the next one, as you say, did in fact come to the Kennedy Center. And I've been trying to break in DC, and I rode Nixon into my town. And so that's how I ended up.
How many rehearsals did that orchestra do before they did the recording? St. Luke's.
The recording was after the performances.
Oh,
so
I see. Okay.
They were pretty ready to do it.
I got it.
And of course, that was a fan. I mean, just being in New York, I'd never spent time in New York. I got to spend a month there. I loved it. And again, then that went after DC, which again got me connected to the Kennedy Center, which led to all sorts of things. Then it went to Amsterdam, and growing up in San Francisco, my impression of Amsterdam was that it's kind of like what San Francisco always wanted to be in the 70s. Anyhow, and it's funny because in all the previous runs, some body of performers had kind of complained a little bit. I think in Houston it might have been the string players, and then in DC I think it might have been the woodwinds, and audiences were kind of slowly coming along. By the time it got to Amsterdam, I mean, they just played it like it was nothing. And audiences were just standing ovations from day one. And It might have been that Ado DeVart, who kind of started John Adams' career, really launched into fame in San Francisco by making him the first composer in residence there back in, I think, 81. This was his home turf, and he kind of was in charge of most of the large ensembles of Amsterdam. And so I think he was able to put together the 33 best musicians in the country and run with it. But
let me ask a question about Nixon and China, kind of a composite question.
Absolutely.
John Adams always dealt with serious heavyweight subjects, including the opening of the Phil season, I think in fall of 20, or was it fall of 21? I know Mizell conducted. It was the Transmigration of Souls.
Right, which he wrote for 9/11.
Exactly. Oh, that was for 9/11.
Yes.
So, but what year did that actually? But did that have something to do with the pandemic also? Because Mizell.
No, probably the programming of it may very well have.
Yeah.
But it was originally it was his Pain to 9/11, and that actually won the Pulitzer, I remember.
Yeah, sure did.
Right. Wonderful piece.
Right. So he picks, and then the death of Klinghoffer. So he doesn't pick.
Sure.
It's not the Marriage of Figaro. He gets real gravitas with his subject matter.
Yes. Well, actually, in fact, that was, though I think John is very was very open to that. He's a very thoughtful person, and very I think being connected to the times is very important to him. But Peter Sellers, the director, was really the prime force in that. He and Alice, he brought Alice Goodman's text for Nixon in China, or libretto. And I actually remember John was he had never written an opera before, but in fact, Peter Sellers had heard some non-vocal music, but he heard something that he really thought would deliver on what he saw in Nixon, and but John was willing to throw himself into it, and he certainly did. Same thing was true of Klinghoffer. Again, Peter brought him that. And I think John just saw something that he could really grab, that he felt that his language could make, much stronger. And I believe he's worked with Peter Sellers on all of his operas up until recently. And I know that's been an extraordinarily valuable, very long, fruitful relationship.
It's funny him. With Peter Sellers was named. I want to say he was named the stage director for the Washington Opera for a period of time. And being Washington, it's Squaresville here. And in fact, I'm amazed that Nixon in China was even here. It's an audience that loves Madame Butterfly. And then, of course, Peter Sellers going back to Europe, then his real stomping ground becomes Salzburg Festival and, Berlin and places like that, where Robert Wilson also holds forth. So I'm curious, I guess, curious how, the mechanics of that.
I think Nixon in China came in a five venue package, really. I think that all happened at once. I know it's made its way back in many places. I remember the Met did it in 2012. I know it's been done in a number of places. I myself did it again in Frankfurt after the original run. I know that the original one was Houston, Brooklyn, DC, Amsterdam, and the Edinburgh Festival, and that's I mean, John has his music has taken off so much that it of course shows up pretty much anywhere. So it's interesting.
By the way, a little funny story.
Yeah.
The Kennedy Center Orchestra came in at the old West End Cafe. They came in after the show with the conductor. I can't remember his name, but they had done Synergies. What's that one called? It was with Seattle Pacific Ballet.
Fearful Symmetries?
Fearful Symmetries.
Yes.
That's a 30-minute long piece, and it was done with.
I premiered it.
Oh, no kidding. Well, Well, apparently the conductor flipped 2 pages in the middle of it. Right, where you're going digga, 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 boom. And this became a big story. And after it was all over, everybody had a good laugh, including the conductor, because somehow the orchestra found him, and they don't know how.
Yeah. Well, actually,
he found the orchestra, I think.
Yeah. Well, actually, after the Nixon run, in fact, that opened up some wonderful performance opportunities for me through John Adams's work. Again, I think his first piece after Nixon in China was Fearful Symmetries, and I remember at the end of it, there's a big HX1 solo in it, and I remember he approached me and said, "I'm writing this piece, and I really want to feature the HX1 because he really loved using it in Nixon." And so yeah, I remember we premiered that at Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center, and of course, again, more just what an opportunity, and then I think that was followed pretty shortly thereafter by Woundresser, which had which we did at Carnegie. And so here I was, 23, and it's like, wow, playing Carnegie Hall. I think that was a little bit like the symphony playing my piece. I just sort of showed up for it back when I was, 11 or so. And, I couldn't really believe, in looking back, it's hard to believe that I was able to, to have those wonderful opportunities that were often kind of unexpected. But
so, yeah, let's talk about, we can talk about John Adams, and everybody can look him up and look up his extraordinary music. And I want to talk a little bit more about a couple of other things related to that. But what effect does that have on you, John, as a participant in there's no one like John Adams over the last 40 years that I can think of. Maybe you're going to find a parallel, but I don't think so. And that gets played,
Oh, absolutely.
That's the thing.
Well, it's interesting because one area we haven't talked about are the piano reductions I did for his
Oh,
for him,
right, exactly.
that had a I think has had quite a strong impact on a lot of my own writing. Um, not so much stylistically, but basically, I mean, actually, the story there. In fact, again, I sort of stumbled into it between high school and college. He came to me with this project to do a piano reduction just for rehearsal purposes for of his piece Harmonium, which I had just heard and was absolutely blown away by. And he had like $1,000, and which to me was all the money in the world. So I threw myself into it, probably hundreds of hours. And when I had finished it, he was like, "Oh my God, did you really do all this?" I was expecting some little Tinker Toys type thing, but no, I took it very seriously. But anyway, a number of years, came back to me with Death of Klinghoffer and asked me to do likewise, and then Nixon in China, then Violin Concerto, Gnarly Buttons. I think the last one I did was I was looking at the ceiling, then I saw the sky, which was published in 2013. But just being able to spend that much time that close to the orchestrations of just a consummate master who's also really trying to do something very, very fresh and new. The impact of that, I can really only sense it. I can't really describe it. But the impact. I mean, there's some times where in my own music I feel certain stylistic elements. I mean, I never really knew that he was a minimalist when I was studying with him. Like many students, I didn't really know my teacher's music all that well when I was young, but it was wonderful to get to know his music, through the performing and through the piano reductions. I mean, I think primarily this is kind of following up with the we're talking about with Kirshner. Is I just think that that blend of extreme eloquence of detail with just a very fiery imagination. I
Yeah.
think that's something that I was always struck by in John's music, and doing the piano vocal scores. I think since I'm a pianist, I do a lot of chamber orchestra. I've done some orchestral work and some vocal, but I'm above all a pianist. I think his sense of layering through the orchestra, my attempts, all attempts to bring that, to translate that to the piano, just taught me a whole lot about layering and about just kind of what the piano can do by trying to make it be an orchestra. And some pieces are more pianistic, but some are very, very much not. And I really had to get very adventurous for
Does
myself.
he encourage you to go into the deep end of the pool in terms of dramatic subject matter? Because
I,
that's where he is for sure.
yes, I don't, one thing about staying with John is I don't think he was definitely was never trying to turn out a little mini John Adams. He really was not. And I think he was somebody who he very much respected what I was about. And I think, he would more just try to to introduce me to things. And some of them were more kind of wild and avant-garde. I still remember him spending many hours in the electronic studio at the Conservatory of Music when I was a teenager, and the sea of patch chords, and he sort of just let me go in there for a little while and mess around. Some of them are more classical. I remember him asking me, do you know Mahler? Back when I was, I don't know, 15 or 16 or something like that. And I said, not really. So we actually, I think we were driving. I can't remember, running some errands or something between, during before our lesson. And so he dipped into a record shop and he bought me Mahler's Fourth, an LP of it with Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. And I went home and I just absolutely fell in love. And so I don't think he's ever been one to really try to to push people in a particular way. I know that he very much loves working with students, though he has not end up doing that so much. But yeah,
Yeah,
actually, yeah, go ahead.
before the pandemic, the NSO with Noseda conducting did the Gospel According to the Other Mary. I think that's the title. And I walked away from that. You know what? Have you heard the piece by any chance?
You know what? I should have, but I haven't. I will.
So
I'll go listen to it.
I think he was there, but I can't remember. It was not the premiere. I think the premiere was by Dudamel. But Noseda,
Oh, I'm so jealous, John. That was so wonderful hearing Dudamel doing John's music.
yeah. So well, this was I thought it was one of the. It sounds stupid. I walked out of there thinking this is the greatest performance of anything I have ever heard in my life, and it was a combination of the piece. You know, he had the chorus, like a Greek chorus of three countertenors in that piece, which was absolutely the eeriest thing you've ever heard in your life. And it was so profound and so prophetic, and I was able to actually follow the text along. I just thought it was. I just can't get away from how deep this guy is with his music.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to,
Yeah.
let me get this in the, to get all that. Let's see how we do this. Yes, to get all that in the score and capture this subject matter that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the first time I had that reaction to John Adams was at the premiere of Harmonium in 81, which I ended up again doing the piano reduction of. But I've had it many, many times since then. I remember pieces I've heard in the recent past. They're not necessarily recent pieces, but I remember Karma at Big Sur, City Noir, that was with Dudamel, and of course, actually back when it came out, El Nino, his oratorio, which actually I was asked to reduce, and by then I was getting so busy that I tried for 6 months and then had to give it up because I just didn't have time. But but just some you know. John has something very special. It's not hard to see how he's achieved. But
I just want to mention a little tiny anecdote. I was playing at the West End Cafe where we met on many occasions, and I couldn't tell you what year this was, but he brought his ensemble from San Francisco, maybe 10 musicians.
Mm-hmm.
What were they called? They had a name, as I recall. Like as an ensemble, it had a name.
Okay.
And
I can't help you off the top of my head.
They were doing, I don't know where they were, at the Terrace Theater or something like that. Anyway, they all came into the West End Cafe afterwards, and I got to chat with them. And he was, we were just standing around chatting, and that's pretty much my story. I was very impressed that they did Frank Zappa, and I asked him about that. Because I had a very passing knowledge of Frank Zappa, but there were people like John Adams that were taking a deep dive into
absolutely. And again, I think he really he's spoken in his autobiography Hallelujah Junction, but also to me at various times over the years. He wants his music to really do something. He really wants to move something. He wants to touch something, and I think whenever he works, a certain amount of it is play, but I think he finds a certain honesty, a certain depth. Again, it reminds me a little bit of Jonathan Harvey telling me, the purity of intention. I think John's intent has a certain purity to it, and I think that shows through. And I think that's why he's able to write just very moving things. And so,
did he? I know Slatkin did a couple of his things. They did right when Slatkin started. He brought John out there to the audience, and they did the slow ride on. What is it? Slow ride on.
Fast. Short ride on a fast machine.
Short ride. on a
Short
clarinet,
right on fast machine,
which was
yes.
my first experience hearing
Yes.
Adam's music. And of course, I was told, do you remember Tony Ames, the principal percussionist?
Hmm.
He was there forever. He told me, oh yeah, you got to hear this piece. So I came to the rehearsals in those days, and he said, yeah, you got to watch out for this piece. It's gonna knock you out. It'll blow you away. And he wasn't kidding. You know, there was nothing like it I'd
Yeah,
ever
well,
heard in my life.
it's funny because I remember John telling me at one point that his operas, of course, were big, huge, spectacular affairs, but that where he tended to really clean up in terms of royalties and so forth was these little pieces like
Right.
in a fast machine, because they're so easy to put program anywhere, and they just would. And that's the point that where he really realized that he could actually maybe make a living here, is when he goes,
Right.
first BMI check, after those little pieces, Trumbull Lontana and Short Ride in a Fast Machine and the Chairman Dances, which he sort of distilled from Nixon in China. But he says those are the quickie, but very, very sweet in that regard. But he really enjoyed playing those as well. I mean, he loves doing a lark as much as he loves doing something very profound.
But John, I want to talk about your brain here. Anyone who enjoys transcribing Nixon in China for piano, it's got to be maybe a few more screws inside there than normal people have. So how do you find yourself getting into that kind of detail as a human being?
Yeah, well, I think again is you can overthink these things, and so I've kind of let myself kind of flow through a little bit. It'd probably be hard for me to tell you in any sort of very abstract or intellectual way about this. I mean, it's interesting in terms of my own work, where that is. I mean, John, I know one thing he told me back when I sort of asked him about, how it is that you manage to achieve such high levels of success and fame, and as in the nature that it is, and have any advice, and it's interesting. He said he guys said that, well, one thing, it requires tremendous dedication, and one thing with you is that I've always noticed that you seem to be a pretty happy person, and you tend to be fairly somebody who you're often pretty happy doing things that are not necessarily at that level, even as you are also love doing things that they rise up to there, and that's true. I'm here at Austin College. I'm a teacher. I love teaching. I love composing. I love performing. I do a whole lot of all of them. And sometimes it's very, very kind of way up there types of things. I did a wonderful concert with this tremendous baritone, Jeremy Hugh Williams, Welsh baritone, who's the Order of the British Empire back in 2021, and Wales' highest honor for promoting spreading Welsh music. But I had a wonderful concert with him in which I actually did a couple of, I rearranged a song cycle that I wrote back for soprano for him, and next Sunday I'm doing a concert with this wonderful cellist, Leslie Whalen, and I get pieces done. I love doing stuff. I also do community theater. I directed the Rocky Horror Show a year and a half ago, but also things with the Shakespeare concerts of Massachusetts, do stuff with them. I like doing a lot of stuff, and I think what John said about music being play and let things flow freely. That along with the Kirshner's brush stroke of the master, they're just kind of always playing with me. I love free improvisation. And I discovered free improvisation back at Tanglewood in '85, totally by accident, because I've written about this elsewhere, but I was far too wound tight with a project I was doing for Kirshner, and I was off in a woods in a cabin, and I got so frustrated I just started throwing my hands down and just thrashing around, and that lasted for 2 hours, and at the end of which I realized, wow, there's more here than I know, because so much of the stuff that came out was wonderful and I had no clue about it. So
speaking of Tanglewood, did you ever run into Schuller?
oh, I did indeed. That's where I met him, as he spoke to the composers at the Younger Tanglewood, the one back in '81.
Right.
And I was incredibly inspired by him.
Can we diverge just for a couple minutes and talk about Gunther Schuller?
Sure. A couple minutes will take us to 8. But please.
Well, I've had my own experiences with him, and I've become friends with his son, George, who's now managing his archive and comes down here to the library. George is a jazz drummer, sort of. I mean, he does a lot of, like any Schuller would, he does a lot of different stuff, but he's very busy as a jazz drummer in New York. Mm-hmm. But he gets down here a lot just to make sure the Library of Congress is doing what they should be doing with his father's shoeboxes. So anyway, I'd be curious to hear about your interaction with Gunther Schuller.
I mean, other than that, back when I was 16 years old and being spoken to him, my only other interaction with Gunther Schuller was actually I got another late night call to help launch the Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks Orchestra, and I actually traveled to the middle of DC at 1 o'clock in the morning to meet with Gunther Schuller. It was back in what, 92 or 93, something like that. And there were just 3 pieces that they had a superb jazz pianist from New York, but he was already playing like 18 pieces. And
Michael Weiss.
Yeah, and it was going up the next morning with full press coverage at noon. And so I drove there and I got the music, and I told him I had met him back at Tanglewood, and I practiced for hours and was there at 9 a.m. with the orchestra, and we went up at noon. And so that was my primary interaction with Gunther.
So you played the piano parts? Was that it?
Yeah, it was three piano transcriptions of Benny Moten tunes. So it's all this. There's a
yeah, Toby, and no, I actually did those also. One of those was transcribed by Dick Hyman, and another was transcribed possibly by Schuller. Toby and Moten Swing.
David Baker, I think, was good. Yeah,
could very, very well have been. But I know that Michael Weiss did not want to touch those things.
Yeah.
They dragged you in one time, and they dragged me in.
Yeah, so I was in for a grand total of 12 hours.
Well, I had to drop everything. I'm not as smart a piano player as you are. I got the charts on Monday, and I dropped everything to learn those things.
There you go.
It was Boosey playing the piano when he really did play the piano back in the late 20s or whatever. So I had it ready for Saturday. So that's interesting. So John, I'm very curious. I want to hear more about the expansion of what you're doing. In fact, I'd love to hear. We wrap it up here with what you see. I always like to ask the question: what is not working, and what you're striving to make work? What is not quite coming together? A project or an ensemble or something like that. But if you don't want to talk about that, just talk about what's up next.
Well, my cupboards are full of sketches that never went anywhere. I mean, I'd say that one of my primary fascinations probably has something to do with that, the free plus the craft, which I mentioned in my again in the 1985, I discovered free improvisation just by accident. I've continued doing that for years. What's changed in the last few decades is the fact you can now record them. So if you're ready to do a free improv, I can hit go, and I have it there, and I've become increasingly interested in the compositional side of that, of basically being able to find ways of taking very, very fresh, free outpouring, which comes from somewhere that I don't really understand where it comes from, at least to some extent, and find ways to frame it, to take other passages, perhaps also improvised, and just find ways to create this sense of music that is very, very fresh, very, very me, very from the right, straight from the soul, but also having been treated in such a compositional manner that it all works. It could be very well it could be very meticulously composed. And so I've done a number of pieces lately along those lines.
Well, how does that affect your teaching then, John? Are you teaching composers? Are you teaching piano players? Or
I mean, I'm teaching theory. I'm teaching composers. I mean, I will, if I'm doing composers, I will try to get them improvising to some extent, just to free them up if they haven't. Right. As pianists, I will talk very much about the music coming from a certain place of creative spark and energy. I mean, precisely how I do that probably varies, but I can tell that there are influences of that make its way into my particular approach to everything, really.
Here's my question, and it's related to an axe that I like to grind, and that is, if you look at the 18th century, 17th century, 19th century pianists, the Chopins, Liszt, Bach, Handel, Beethoven, they all played extemporaneously, and Mozart.
Sure.
And they weren't known as piano players, although Liszt made a career of that. But really, their work was really as composers. And I have this theory. It's very simplistic, but please tolerate it for a second. That with the rise of the piano competition, that was the end of the creative pianist. So you have Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff, who were great composers and great pianists, and that's pretty much the end of it. So
well, I'll see what I can do.
Yeah. So you have these competitions where these racehorse piano players go out there, and they're all unbelievable. You've heard these things.
Mm-hmm. And I've done very, very few competitions in my life.
Well, of course. I mean, it's
I don't miss that experience.
No, but my point is, I think it's ruined the world of music. It's the death of a lot of music when you have an amazing 19-year-old that they're going to parade all over the world because his Rachmaninoff 3 is just, it's so fast.
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, again, music, piano is just how I'm able to most quickly and most, I guess most genuinely, touch a lot of music. It's something that I've been doing long enough that my fingers do not, are able to navigate things pretty well. And also as an improviser, again, if I just throw my hands down and start playing, I don't have to think about whether I can play something or not. I just do. I just let it come. And for me, it's been a tremendous tool for self-discovery.
Well, why do you think that these people's teachers, these are amazing minds, amazing people that fill these Tchaikovsky, Chopin leads competitions? Mm-hmm. Why do you think their professors don't encourage them, rather than playing Rachmaninoff 2, to invent? That's my question.
I'd have to ask them. I'm probably not the right person to ask, because I am definitely a composer who loves to perform, to play and to teach.
Uh-huh.
So in other words, I'm a composer first. I very much regard myself in that way. So to me, it's an obvious question. Of course, everybody should compose, right. But yeah. Should we say my students, no matter what I'm teaching them, pretty quickly note that the composition is something I have very high regard for, and not necessarily just my own, but the composition of the pieces they're playing. You know, when I perform, one of my images is that, you know, how do I know when a piece is really ready? And honestly, my answer is when I feel like I am the composer improvising it. You know, in a sense, I got close enough into where they are that, in a sense, I'm almost, you know, just letting this stuff fly on my own. Again, it can be a tremendous amount of analysis, et cetera, to get to that point, but you know, it's something to strive for in any case.
Yeah. John, thank you. This was great. It's great to connect. We need to just get together and have a private beer. Are you getting to DC or New York or anything?
Let's see. I'll let you know when I am. By the way, I have a couple of pictures I can share if you want.
Oh yeah, go ahead. And I always promise people it's only an hour, but we goofed around.
Yes, I know, and I want to get there now. It was just a kind of fun ones here.
Wow,
Here's the first
gorgeous.
one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's there. But this is actually the Nixon in China, the original, the none such recording. And here we are in the back. Here's John at one of his desks here, and here's our wonderful Madame Mao, and there's Edo de Vart. And here I am at my mighty HX1, my $35,000 machine, white elephant. And here's actually just John and I,
which
back,
can now be done with an iPhone, by the way.
Yeah, it can absolutely be done with probably a watch right now. But anyhow, here's John and I when he came to Dallas. The Dallas Symphony played his violin concerto. I'm trying to remember the name, but anyhow, it was wonderful to see him. And you know, I don't see him as much as I'd love to these days, but I absolutely follow his music, and I look forward to every new creation that he puts forth before the world.
Yeah,
I count myself very blessed to have known him.
Yeah. Thank you, John. This was fabulous.
Thank you, Burnett. And thank you,
by the way, those who are
coming along.
Yeah, those who are watching, this will be archived, and I'll send you all the link. And I'll chop it a little bit and get all the fumbling around taken out at the beginning, and then I'll post it up on YouTube as part of our series. So, John, thank you, and we'll be in touch. And thank you for everybody that came here today to participate, and so forth.
Been absolutely a pleasure, Burnett. Thank you so much.
All right. See you around.